Hello and welcome to Module 8 of the Building Code Training, Building Code Statewide Adoption Checklist. My name is Charlie Baker. I'm a Program Analyst with Floodplain Management Division, Regional and Field Support at FEMA Headquarters. This video will be walking you through these checklists that's found in the playbook. And remember, this is the general processes for adoption of building codes within a state. When states adopt building codes without weakening the natural hazard resistant provisions in them, buildings are better able to withstand and endure harsh impacts of these natural hazards, resulting in communities that are more resilient and better prepared after an event to get back to their new normal. Proper adoption of these codes is a gradual process, and extreme consideration should be warranted prior to amending any of the codes through the adoption process. Remember, each state has its own set of rules and regulations that determine how these building codes are adopted within their states. There are two general processes the state follows when adopting a building code. They are called the legislative process and regulatory process. Let us take a bit closer look at the legislative action process. Legislative action is the process followed by states when adopting a code. The first step is for a legislative representative to sponsor and present a bill to be adopted in their state. This is followed by a committee or subcommittee reviewing and or adjusting the bill before sending it to the House and or Senate for a vote. The committee or subcommittee will be dependent upon how your state promulgates the process for the state building code adoption. Once the House or Senate approves the bill, it is sent to the other chamber for review, modification, and vote. Public hearings follow this process and allow for the additional comments and feedback from constituents. Then revisions are made based on comments received. Once the revisions and comments are adjudicated, the bill is voted on. Again, caution should be warranted as comments may be received from all stakeholders. Some may propose changes that weaken the natural hazard resistant provisions for various reasons. Allowing this to occur increases the risk that citizens face during an event and may exacerbate damage and lengthen recovery. One of the last steps for the bill is for it to be voted on. This may be followed by an approval by a governor, designee, or the legislature. Then the code is adopted statewide. The local jurisdiction may have to also adopt the code before it becomes effective. The bill may specify a timeline this process must be completed by. When codes are adopted through a regulatory action, the state usually asks a group of stakeholders or interested parties to oversee carrying out the adoption process. This process is set up through a prior legislative action providing direction to the responsible agency, potentially including a timeline for updates. A regulatory action adoption process for building codes is a little different than the legislative action, so let us walk through it and explain. In this process, the first step would be for the state to identify a stakeholder group to continue the process. This group typically consists of code professionals, engineers, architects, builders, builders associations, and other interested parties. This process is set up through procedures already in place and approved by the responsible regulatory body. This may include who can vote and who may be the administrator of the process. The first formal action is the release of a notice stating the reason for adopting the building code, typically for the health, safety, welfare of the citizens, what the building code name is going to be, and who the stakeholders involved in the process will be. Once this is accomplished, the public may submit comments, feedback, and propose amendments. When the period for public input is expired, the stakeholders review, adjudicate, and consider all comments for rejection or incorporation into the building code. Again, caution should be heeded to ensure no weakening of the disaster-resistant provisions of the building code occurs, as this increases risk to citizens, and the overall goal of building codes is to reduce risk from a variety of sources, including natural hazards, as well as construction methods. Next, the building code is presented and voted on by the authoritative body the state requires to be involved in the adoption process. This may be the body formed to oversee the process, or in the form of a bill presented to both sides of the legislature, the House and Senate. Once the bill passes, the building code can then be implemented. Some states do require another level of approval by a governor or designee or legislature. Similar to the legislative process, the local jurisdiction may have to also adopt the code for it to become effective. The bill may specify a timeline this process must be completed by. We want to remember two key takeaways from this. One, current disaster-resistant building codes, if properly adopted and enforced, help create a resilient community that bounces back better after an event to its new normal, reducing damage, suffering, and financial loss. Second, check with your state to see the specifics about their procedures, as they vary and all have attributes specific to them tailored to meet their regulatory needs of their processes. Get involved and help reduce suffering before, during, and after a disaster in your state or community. Please refer to FEMA P-2196 Building Code Adoption Playbook for authorities having jurisdiction for additional relevant information. You may find this publication at FEMA Building Science, along with many other useful publications and resources, including the Building Science Resource Library, building code documents, including reducing flood losses through the international codes, and potential building code funding opportunities. Thanks for watching the Building Code Training Series, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more building code resilience.